It was the kind of road that made you wonder if you'd missed your turn an hour ago. A single strip of cracked asphalt, surrounded on both sides by fields of waist-high weeds swaying under a restless wind. No other cars. No gas stations. No reason to stop, except for the one that finally appeared like a ghost in the heat shimmer ahead. The old filling station sat on the corner of a fork in the road, its paint faded to a lifeless gray, the roof of the pump canopy sagging in the middle like tired shoulders. The sign that once boasted fuel prices now hung at an angle, its numbers long faded away. A single crow perched on the top beam, watching us approach with the kind of patience that made me uneasy. Claire leaned forward in the passenger seat, eyes narrowing. "That's it?" "That's it," I said, pulling the car to the shoulder. The place had been closed for 15 years, according to the report. Shuttered overnight after the owner vanished without a word. Locals swore no one had touched it since. No sales. No renovations. Nothing. But recently, strange calls had been coming in, late-night passers-by claiming they'd seen the lights on, heard the hum of the old fuel pumps, even smelled gasoline in the air. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching on gravel. The wind carried the faint metallic tang of rust and something sharper underneath, fuel, maybe. Claire was already scanning the building, her hand resting lightly on her hip, her coat catching the breeze. There were 2 pump islands in front, each with a pair of machines that looked like they hadn't seen a drop of fuel since the turn of the century. One still had the hose hanging loose, the nozzle swaying gently like it had just been let go. "Could be the wind," Claire said quietly. "Could be," I agreed, but I didn't believe it. We walked past the pumps toward the building. The glass on the front doors was dusty but intact, the lettering of "Office" barely visible beneath the grime. A dead moth clung to the corner of the frame. That's when I noticed them, tracks. Faint tire marks, fresh enough that they hadn't yet been softened by dust or wind, curved in from the road and stopped right next to the first pump. Whoever had been here hadn't been on foot. I crouched down, brushing my fingers lightly over the pattern. Not from a modern car, the tread was old, narrow, like from a truck built decades ago. Claire was looking toward the side of the building now. "Harry, do you hear that?" At first I didn't. Then, faintly, through the sigh of the wind, a crackle. Like a voice buried under static. We moved closer, stepping carefully. Rounding the corner, we found a small service door, the kind used by staff to get in and out without opening the main shop. The door's paint was peeling away in strips, exposing bare wood underneath. The sound was clearer here. A radio. The low hum of a broadcast that shouldn't exist. I tried the handle. It was locked. Claire tapped the door lightly with her knuckles. The radio inside went silent. I looked at her. She looked at me. No one spoke. Then, without warning, the radio crackled back to life, and a slow, deliberate click sounded from somewhere deeper inside. I placed my hand on the door again, leaning my weight just slightly against it. The wood was cool under my palm. And then, something moved on the other side. A shadow, passing close to the narrow strip of light at the bottom. We both froze. The radio fell silent once more. The only sound was the wind against the siding. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "Harry, we're not alone in there." The rain had stopped hours ago, but the damp still clung to everything, the air, the road, even the skin. The cracked asphalt of the highway shimmered under the cold yellow glow of the gas station's lights, each puddle stretching into strange, warped reflections of the sky above. It was the kind of night where the silence didn't feel empty, but heavy, like it was holding its breath. Claire was outside before me, her coat collar turned up, her eyes scanning the dark stretch of road. The hiss of cooling pavement filled the air, but her gaze wasn't fixed on the highway. Instead, she stared beyond it, toward the dense tree line, where shadows seemed thicker than they should be. I stepped up beside her. "What is it?" She didn't turn. "Something's there." Her voice was flat, but tense, like she was speaking to herself as much as to me. At first, I heard nothing but the faint hum of the streetlight behind us. Then, somewhere in the woods, it came, a faint metallic sound. A clink. A scrape. Like a chain shifting under weight. It came again. "That's not the wind," Claire murmured. We didn't need to speak further. She moved first, crossing the wet road with quick steps, and I followed. The darkness swallowed us as soon as we stepped off the asphalt, the glow of the gas station shrinking behind like a distant lighthouse. The damp earth squelched beneath our boots, and the air smelled of wet leaves and rust. I flicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the mist in a thin, shaky column, catching droplets in the air like floating dust motes. Something glinted ahead. Metal. We moved toward it slowly, keeping our steps quiet. It was an old road sign, rusted and bent almost in half. The letters were worn to ghosts of themselves, unreadable. But what stood out wasn't the sign, it was the strip of fabric tied tightly around its post. Red. Faded, but still vibrant enough to catch the eye. The edges were frayed, stiff with dried mud. Claire crouched to examine it. "It's been here for a long time," she said softly, fingers brushing the rough surface. "But why tie it here, in the middle of nowhere?" Before I could answer, the metallic sound came again. Sharper this time. Closer. I swept my flashlight to the left. That's when I saw him. A man. He stood perfectly still between two trees, maybe 20 feet away. His face was hidden in the shadow of an old cap, and his jacket looked as if it had been part of the forest for decades, mottled with dirt and stains, edges frayed. His boots sank slightly into the wet ground. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared. "Hello." I called out. My voice felt too loud in the stillness. The man's head tilted slightly, like he was studying us. Then, without a word, he turned and stepped deeper into the woods. The chain sound followed him, metallic and deliberate, until it faded into the distance. We followed the path he'd taken, pushing through wet branches, the smell of soil and moss growing stronger. The beam of my flashlight caught disturbed earth ahead, a patch of ground recently dug. Claire knelt, brushing away loose soil with her gloved hands. Someone was here not long ago. In the shallow hole, half covered in dirt, was a small metal box. It was old, the hinges speckled with rust, the lid dented as if it had been pried open before. I lifted it out, feeling its surprising weight. It wasn't locked, but the metal was cold, unnaturally cold. Claire held her breath as I pulled the lid open. Inside, wrapped tightly in brittle wax paper, was a cassette tape. The paper crackled as I unwrapped it, revealing the yellowed label. 2 words were written in black marker, the handwriting shaky and uneven, as if done in haste: "Don't listen." The night seemed to press in tighter around us. Claire's eyes met mine. "We're taking this back." I hesitated, looking back into the darkness of the trees where the man had vanished. The thought came unbidden: what if he's still watching? Without a word, we turned toward the highway. The gas station lights looked further away than before, like they'd retreated while we were gone. And in the distance, faint but distinct, came the sound of a chain, dragging. The gas station felt different when we came back. The same cracked asphalt, the same sagging canopy, but now the shadows seemed heavier, as if they had gathered while we were gone. The puddles on the road reflected not just the yellow glow of the overhead lights, but something colder, like a memory you didn't want to remember. Inside the car, the cassette sat on the dashboard, still wrapped in its brittle wax paper. I could feel Claire watching it the way a person watches a locked door when they know something is on the other side. "You believe in warnings?" she asked quietly. "Not usually," I said, starting the engine. "But I believe in evidence." We didn't play it there. Not in the open. The man in the forest could still be near, and I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of knowing we were curious. Instead, I drove us a mile down the road to a turnout where the trees gave way to an open field. The moon was bright enough to show us we were alone. The player was old, stashed in my kit for moments when you couldn't risk digital copies. I slid the tape in. The mechanism clicked. A low hiss filled the car, the familiar static of analog recording. Then, a voice. Not loud, not rushed, but urgent in a way that made my skin tighten. If you found this, you need to leave. Don't stay at the station. Don't. A burst of distortion swallowed the words, like something pressing against the tape from the inside. The voice came back, shakier now. He comes when the pumps start. You won't see the truck until it's too late. If you hear the chain, you've already been marked. Claire's fingers tightened on her coat sleeve. She didn't look at me, eyes fixed on the dashboard as if staring at the tape would stop the voice. Another crackle. Then something else, faint, but distinct. The clink of a chain dragging across gravel. It wasn't coming from the tape. It was outside. I killed the player and shut off the headlights in one motion. The field ahead sank into darkness, and for a moment, silence took over again. Then, out on the road, a shape rolled into view. An old fuel truck. The kind with rounded fenders and a tank body dulled by decades. It moved slow, too slow, headlights dim as candle flames. No license plate. The driver's window was black, either too dark to see inside, or there was nothing inside at all. The truck passed without stopping, chains swaying from its bumper, ringing softly in the cold air. Claire and I didn't speak until its glow faded into the distance. We need to check the station's power, she said finally. If the pumps run, someone's making them. Back at the gas station, we kept the car dark and approached on foot. The front doors were still locked, but the service door where we'd heard the radio was different, the paint around the lock had fresh splinters. Someone had forced it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old oil and mold. Shelves stood like skeletons of a shop long dead, and dust lay so heavy on the counter it seemed part of the wood. But at the far end, behind a half-collapsed wall, a single fluorescent light buzzed faintly. We stepped around debris until we found the back room. The hum we'd heard earlier was louder here. In the corner stood an ancient generator, patched with mismatched parts, its fuel line running through a hole in the floor. And beside it, a radio, just as before. Only this time, it was turned off. The plug dangled loose. Claire crouched, touching the generator's housing. "Warm," she murmured. There was another table in the room, covered in scraps of paper and torn maps. Most were of the local highways, but one was different, hand-drawn, showing the gas station at the center, and lines spreading out like spokes. Each spoke ended in a date. Some dates were crossed out. Others weren't. Tonight's date was circled twice. I felt it before I heard it, the faint vibration in the floor. A deep mechanical rumble, getting closer. Claire's eyes met mine. The truck. The rumble started as a faint tremor under our feet, like the first roll of thunder before a storm. Then it grew, low, steady, mechanical, pressing against the thin walls of the back room. Each second it swelled, filling the space with the sound of something heavy and alive moving closer. Claire froze, her eyes locked on the doorway. The faint beam of the truck's headlights slid across the cracked linoleum floor in long, narrow streaks, climbing the walls before fading again. I motioned for her to kill the light above the table. Her hand found the switch by feel, and the room sank into darkness. Now the only illumination came from the headlights sweeping the yard outside, like a slow-moving searchlight. The shadows shifted with each pass, turning the piles of debris into strange shapes that seemed to flinch when the light touched them. The generator coughed once, a dry, metallic rattle, then sputtered into silence. The hum that had been the heartbeat of the room was gone. In the pause it left behind, the world felt hollow. That's when we heard it. The chain. It was close now, the drag and clink of each link grinding against the wet ground. Not random, not hurried. Deliberate. Measured. The sound of someone who didn't need to rush because they already knew where you were. I crept toward the doorway, staying low, keeping to the wall where the shadow was deepest. From there I could see the truck. It sat in the center of the yard, idling so slow it almost seemed like the engine might die at any moment. Its body was rounded, thick with age, the kind of fuel hauler you'd expect to see in a museum, not on the road. The tank's paint was sun-bleached and pitted with rust, but in the glow of the headlights I saw faint streaks of something dark running down its side, as if it had been washed with dirty water that never quite dried. The driver's window was black. Not tinted, just empty. Like there was nothing inside to catch the light. Then, movement. The driver's door swung open with a creak so soft it barely reached me. A heavy boot stepped down into the mud, sending a ripple through the shallow puddle it landed in. The man wore a long, oil-dark coat that shone wet in the light, the brim of his old cap shadowing most of his face. He walked with no hesitation to the back of the truck, each step accompanied by the faint tug of something behind him. He reached in, his arm disappearing into the darkness of the bed, and came out holding it, the chain. Thick, uneven, the kind used to moor a boat or anchor heavy machinery. Its end vanished into the shadows, but I could hear the rest of it grinding softly over the yard as he moved. The chain seemed almost too heavy for one man, but he carried it like it weighed nothing. He didn't look toward the station. Didn't search. Didn't even pause. He simply crossed the yard until he reached the nearest pump. The machine was dead when we'd arrived earlier, coated in layers of grime so thick the numbers were just pale ghosts on the meter. But when he crouched by it, the faint groan of turning gears filled the air. Slowly, the pump's numbers began to spin. I felt Claire shift beside me. Her voice was barely a breath. "There's no power here." "How?" I didn't answer. Because it wasn't just the pump's numbers that changed. In the glow of the headlights, the pump's rusted casing smoothed out, its color shifting back to bright factory red. The cracked glass over the meter seemed to heal itself, the numbers crisp and white again. It was as if the machine had been rewound decades in a matter of seconds. The man straightened, tilting his head toward the road, not like he'd heard something, but like he was listening for something. Then, without a word, he began pulling the chain back toward the truck. The links trailed behind him, leaving a dark, wet line in the dirt that shimmered faintly under the pale light. He climbed into the cab, shut the door, and the engine let out a single, sharp roar before settling into its slow, steady idle. Then, without hurry, the truck rolled back toward the highway, its chains clinking in rhythm with the engine. The pump kept running. Claire exhaled sharply. He left it on. I checked my watch. Midnight exactly. And the meter was climbing, gallons pouring into nothing, as if the pump was feeding something we couldn't see. We didn't go back through the open yard. Not with that sound still in the air. Instead, we slipped out the warped rear door and skirted the lot's edge, crouching low where the weeds grew thick enough to hide us. At the far corner, a section of the chain-link fence sagged inward, its base eaten through with rust. Claire pushed through first. I followed, the metal groaning in complaint as we dropped into a shallow ditch on the other side. We stayed there a while, crouched in the dark, watching the station. No movement. No sound but the steady mechanical click of the pump's meter in the distance. Then, just as we were about to move, I saw it, a narrow trail leading from the ditch into the woods. And tied to a branch just at the trail's mouth was a strip of red fabric. Fresh. The fibers still clean, the knots still tight. Claire's breath clouded the air between us. "Harry, he knows where we're going." The red strip of fabric swayed gently in the cold air, a motion too deliberate for the stillness of the forest. Claire's hand rose toward it, but I caught her wrist. "Not yet," I said quietly. "Let's see where it leads." The trail ahead was narrow, walled in by skeletal branches and moss-choked fallen logs. Mist crawled low, wrapping around our boots, carrying with it the faint chemical tang of gasoline. Behind us, the slow, uneven clicking of the pump's meter at the station echoed through the trees, each tick like a clock marking down to something we didn't want to meet. We moved without speaking, every step soft and measured. Time became strange here. My watch said 5 minutes, but it felt closer to half an hour. The trail curved through a patch of denser trees before opening into a clearing. The first thing I saw was the fuel truck. Same rounded fenders, same battered tank. But now it sat silent, cab door hanging open, its chain coiled neatly on the ground like a sleeping serpent. Lantern light, pale, steady, hung from a hook near the truck, throwing long shadows across the scene. The second thing was the red strips. Dozens of them, tied to sticks, rocks, twisted bits of metal. Some were so old they'd bleached almost white, others bright and fresh. They weren't random, each marked a shallow depression in the ground. Claire knelt beside one and brushed away the damp earth. Inside was a rusted car key, a wallet split at the seams, and a crumpled photograph of a smiling family. She moved to the next. A single child's shoe, worn but clean. Another hole held a driver's license, edges curled from moisture. "These are all people," she whispered. "Every strip is someone." And then I saw what the markers circled. In the center of the clearing stood a fuel pump. Not rusted, not broken, perfect. Factory red paint gleamed under the lantern light, the glass spotless, the hose coiled neatly on its hook. The meter read 0000. 0, waiting. The sound of the chain came from behind us. The figure stepped from the tree lean, soaked coat, old cap pulled low. The chain trailed behind him, links whispering over the wet ground. When the lantern's glow reached his face, I saw it clearly for the first time. Human. Pale. Lined with exhaustion. It was the voice from the cassette. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "But since you're here, you'll understand." He passed us without hurry, went straight to the pump, unhooked the nozzle, and let a thin stream of silvery fuel spill into the mud. The pump's meter began to spin. The ground trembled beneath our feet. "This place," he said without looking at us, "feeds off the road. Every few years, the station calls someone, a driver, a passerby. The pump fills the ground, and the ground takes them. Been this way since it was built." Claire's voice was sharp. "And you keep it alive?" He glanced at her. "I keep it contained. If the pump runs dry on its own, it spreads. I feed it, mark the ground, bury what it takes. Keeps it here." The numbers climbed, 15. 0, 23. 6, faster now. The trembling deepened. "What happens when you can't anymore?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was low. "Then it grows. And there's no stopping it." The holes began to collapse inward, swallowing the objects inside. The red strips fluttered violently despite the dead air. The lantern flickered. I stepped toward the pump. "Then we end it now." The man's eyes widened. "You don't know what." I grabbed the nozzle from his hands and jammed it into the side of the massive rusted tank beside the truck. Fuel sprayed across the corroded metal, and in the same motion, I kicked the lantern over. Flames leapt instantly, racing along the spilled liquid. The fire climbed the pump, curling around it like living things. The man shouted, half warning, half rage, but the roar of the fire swallowed his words. The meter screamed upward, 40. 0, 62. 7, until the ground itself bucked beneath us. A deep groan rose from below, something vast shifting in the dark. And then, with a sharp metallic crack, the pump folded in on itself. The flames vanished in a sudden implosion, sucking heat and sound from the clearing. The meter froze. Silence. The holes were gone. The red strips lay still. When I looked back toward the truck, the man was gone. No footprints. No chain. Nothing. We walked out in near darkness, the path back to the station somehow shorter. The roadside pump stood dark, its numbers frozen. The air smelled of damp earth, not gasoline. As we reached the car, Claire leaned on the door. "It's over." I started the engine. For this place, yes. And I knew it was true, the pump was gone, the station dead for good. Whatever it had been feeding, it would starve. We drove away. Neither of us looked back.